Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today. My name is Jodie Glean. I am a member of the Greater Toronto Area Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I am pleased and honored to have joining me for this month's edition of Community Corner, May Louie. May, as we get started, may we learn more about you? Can you kindly share with the viewers more information about who you are and about the anti-racism work that you engage in through May Louie Consulting?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jodie. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to talk about my work and what I do. So I have a consulting business called May Louie Consulting, easy to remember. And I've been doing this work for over 20 years, various times, mostly part-time while I had other part-time and full-time jobs. And I do, in general, anti-racism, anti-oppression workshops, mostly for people at the beginner level in predominantly white organizations. Very often I found that it's in predominantly women organizations, women run. So whether that's mostly women's services, women's shelters, and other services like that, and just introduction to anti-oppression, intersectionality, anti-racism. And I'm specializing a little bit more talking about anti-Asian racism and unlearning racism, how to be an activist. I have a number of workshops listed on my website in which, but I always adapt them to whatever the client is looking for. And so, yeah, I got started. I have a master's in education that I received at OISE Toronto. And I received that in 1997, which is a while ago, and started fairly immediately with a client or two, maybe a client or two a year. Wasn't very rigorous at the time, and I've learned a great deal, which I'll talk about through this interview. And I learned a lot about myself as well. And in terms of my background, I am a mixed race. I am a white presenting. I have a Chinese father and a white mother, sort of white Jewish mother born in Canada. And my father immigrated here from China to Montreal, actually, where I was born in the 50s. And just feeling, while I have experienced racism, I feel like I have a role to play in teaching about racism. I certainly have a skill and an aptitude and an interest and a passion for it. And it's something that is very much a big part of both my paid and unpaid life.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so, a part of the what you alluded to in your responses really leads into the second question. So, knowing that engagement in anti-racism education and change work is not only a profession, but it's truly a calling. Can you describe what led you to anti-racism work and what has been some of the highs and lows as you've engaged in this field in the Greater Toronto Area?
For sure. So I think what led me to the work is my dad experienced a fair bit of racism as well as anti-immigrant stuff because he was an immigrant. And even when he got his papers, he still very much felt that somehow he could be sent back. So there was sort of he never talked about that though, and he never used the word racism. He was very stubborn and very independent. And when people at his work would criticize his English, especially his written English, he would be very sort of determined to sort of prove them wrong and to show that he had made no grammatical errors. And while he was learning English when he was here, there were very few, if any, ESL courses available. So sort of seeing that struggle, even though, again, he never named it the way I name it, brought a level of sort of analysis. And in mixed race families, it's interesting when there's a white parent or a white family, is that there was racism in our home, and racism from my mother's family towards my father and how he spoke. And I sort of, again, I didn't have language for this growing up, but there was something fundamentally unjust. And my white family is very, very what we can say is small L liberal, very progressive, and seeing sort of racism come from that place, including with me, right? So I have a brother and a sister, and I'm the one that is the activist and the anti-racist advocate, even before I became an educator. And it was just something I felt like, you know, it literally started in the home, and sort of spread sort of outward from that. In terms of highlights, for me, especially because I'm very often with a group one or two times, and I don't really see them again, something about the ability for me, which I think I have, to engage people, to not, you know, well, maybe not to not, but to engage people right away, but to also be firm on, you know, this is a place to talk and learn, but I will tell you if you're using terminology, if things are problematic, like I will tell you that in a gentle and guiding way, but also very firm, like this is not okay and this is why, and keeping that engagement. And in adult education, we learn a number of things around different modalities of teaching, small groups, pairs. None of this is possible in the same kind of way over Zoom, but I have adapted, using images, using videos. I find amazing pieces of information, mostly on social media, that I just find and grab. I have a million different categories for all the different pieces that I've collected over the years, keep things updated. And that's a way to sort of keep people engaged. And when the other thing that is a highlight for me is seeing the change that I'm facilitating, and having people own it themselves, especially white people, to own that, you know, if you think this is wrong, which most people that I work with think racism is wrong, there's rarely very conservative people in the crowd, but that's not enough, right? It's not enough to say racism is bad, racism is not a thing that I support, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like, you actually have to do things, especially, and I can say this as a white presenting person, and I name that, and I name my white privilege and my passing privilege, saying, you know, this is an obligation that we have if we want a more just world, even though I have been minimally harmed by active and covert racism. And white people in general have not been harmed at all by racism. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. And in fact, it must matter for justice and equity seeking people. And it is for me. And if I can inspire that in others and be an example, and I will say that my learning isn't over. And I've been doing this work for over 20 years, my actual learning around all sorts of manners, especially around ways that I try to be an ally and supporter, such as anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism. And I mentioned those two forms of very overt violent racism and how they're enacted in Canada, as ways to sort of engage around. My learning continues in these areas, will never be complete, nor is yours. And I think that engages people because there's a sort of a relatability to that, but also sort of the line around just being sad, or just being, you know, sitting with your sort of sad feelings or angry feelings is absolutely not enough. And in terms of sort of, you know, challenges or sort of lows, there's a challenging bar in terms of that level of engagement that I look to get. It doesn't always happen when people already think that they already get it. And when they already think that, and that they have nothing else to learn. And I will often say, if you think you have nothing else to learn, then you actually have not the most to learn, but a great deal to learn. Because when we are in the work, as I am in the work, I would never say I have nothing to learn. And even if I were to just, you know, take a 101, you know, course just to, you know, I can absolutely learn from that. I can also learn as an educator around how to deliver material, but on the content level, I am open that it is very possible, and I often do, and I often learn from my participants as well. And so I think, and that's a bit of my kind of attitude and orientation as an adult educator, that basically education is kind of ongoing. And if anything ever makes me go, hey, whoa, what did I just think about that? And I've had a few moments like this, recently, and kind of all the time. And it's just like, okay, so that's some pockets of stuff that I still need to unpack, and this is very important to keep that at the forefront, and to not be, I'm fine, it's those other people that are the problem.
Oh, thank you so very much. And to the viewers, in my role as director of the Anti-Racism and Cultural Diversity Office, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to learn from May Louie. And so I can attest to how inspirational and informative that you are in your delivery and in the information that you seek. So thank you for the work that you do. And given the context that we have been placed in the past year and a half, anti-racism practitioners have been engaged like never before, addressing anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racism, and many forms of systemic oppressions that exist. What new learnings have you discovered about yourself? And how have you deepened your practice in anti-racism work, particularly in this past year?
That's a very good question, and thank you for your comments about my how I did a wonderful presentation with your department, and was very happy with everything about that, in terms of how it was received, as well as the what I shared. In terms of my practice, it's interesting, just because I have been practicing, as I've said, for over 20 years, and it's certainly in the Chinese community, the Chinese Canadian community, where I sort of one of my communities where I live. There's definitely been, in terms of the allowance, there's certainly been an increase, no question, but definitely an allowance for anti-Asian, anti-Chinese, anti-East Asian racism, absolutely. And that's since January, even before we actually had COVID cases in Canada or Toronto. There's definitely been a huge sort of permissible public uptick in that kind of overt violence. But of course, in terms of anti-Black racism, and almost a year ago, the publicized and filmed murder of George Floyd, who was not the first Black person to be murdered on camera by the police, and definitely other, we could call them sort of high, well-known cases were circulated for the last, at least 8 to 10 years. So we can name some of the names of, folks that sort of reached up to Canada. But for whatever reason, people have different theories around why, especially white communities sort of heard this in a way that they did not hear before. People that were not engaged heard this in a way, and actioned this in a way that they hadn't before. And so, I'm on LinkedIn. At the time, a year ago, I was looking for employment, and there was an explosion of sort of equity diversity managers, equity diversity directors, officers in, places like commercial places, Canadian Tire, Staples, so many places, which is great on the one hand, for sure. But there's sort of interesting pieces around, is this one person, are they supported, and sort of a lot of other pieces about that. But to answer your question, in terms of my practice, I have actually much, compared to last year, and I launched my website in November of last year. And even though I've been doing the work, but I haven't had a proper website, it's been not great. And I've been, finally I found someone that could do website and do a logo and just everything, because I was like, I can't do a website until I have a logo. And then I just never sort of got motivated, because it was a very challenging year for me last year, as it was for many people, but I wasn't working, and there was just a lot of hard things about that. So I launched my website and finally had something to show people. It's like, my resume, my current resume is posted there, as well as the workshops that I do. But about a year ago, I had a much broader range of workshops that I said that I would offer, including working with co-facilitators to offer anti-Black racism workshops and anti-Indigenous racism workshops, given that I am not Black or Indigenous. And I've actually decided to remove those from my website, and that if someone asks me to work with them, I'm happy to do so, but that I'm feeling very much that that work should go to the practitioners who, have lived experience in those areas. And so even for me to offer to do this, and I know a number of Black and Indigenous colleagues that I could certainly and have called on sort of to do work in the past with me. But with me as the lead, it was just like, let's kind of back away from that. And in fact, I did not expect the interest in understanding anti-Asian racism and breaking that down into, it's not actually anti-Asian, it's actually anti-Chinese and anti-East Asian racism and Southeast Asian racism, just because Asia is an extremely large and, wildly, diverse in the true sense of the word diverse continent. And in terms of folks in the diaspora and how they experience that kind of racism, including, people in my community and Chinese Canadian community, it's huge. So that's one thing in terms of sort of fine tuning what I offer to being much more close to my actual level of expertise. If I need to speak about anti-Black racism in let's say an anti-oppression or an intersectionality workshop, I absolutely will speak to that, and I will name that and name the specific differences of, let's call it regular racism, in terms of how racism operates under white supremacy, how anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism have very specific histories and how they operate. So of course I will speak to that, and sort of, plant those seeds for people to understand. I can speak to disability, I can speak to homophobia, but would refer people again to sort of other facilitators who have, again, lived experience. We could work together on a, joint presentation. That's not a problem. But, and I'm finding that people are responding to that, that there's an active interest in what I have to offer. I have been asked to speak at a number of different anti-Asian racism, panels and presentations. This is unfortunately, due to the horrific violent event that happened this March in Atlanta, Georgia, and making connections as well to the sort of less popular ways to understand what happened there. That also, similar to the pandemic, has kind of, shown, it revealed. Not all of us needed it to be revealed, but revealed to some people, in terms of issues of migrant workers, issues of sex work or sex adjacent work, that this is not the kind of anti-Asian racism that the respectable mainstream anti-Asian racist organizations want me to talk about, but it's there. And there's a group called Butterfly, Migrant Asian sex support workers. I'm sorry, I don't have the name right. So they've been doing work from the beginning. I'm very familiar. I've appeared on panels with the founder, Elaine Lamb, and I think really just pointing that out in terms of these are women making a living. Maybe they're doing sex work, maybe they're not, but for the women that are doing sex work, just looking at what that means. It's not the same as trafficking. That's a whole, getting a little sidetracked, but it's sort of really understanding the complexities and being able to hold that, not just presenting the respectable, innocent people shot while working, which is bad enough. It's absolutely bad enough, but their lives should not be erased. Something that's also lesser known about the women who were killed is that the majority of them were in their 40s and 50s. I think one was in her 60s. So in terms of whatever that stereotype is around who participates in sex work or sex adjacent work, it's just important to sort of look at that. They had families, they had children, their voices have definitely been erased in the media, but that often happens with any killing that is racist and sort of racist and sexist as well. That it's all about the response. It's all about, the police in the case of, George Floyd and other, Mike Brown and other sort of well-known cases. But anyways, it's Yeah, yeah. So that's sort of an example of my own learning, sort of being fine-tuned as well as we go along, in terms of where I take up space and where I need to not take up space.
Ooh, you are speaking a whole word. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to acknowledge the complexities of the work. I want to acknowledge um, the responsibilities that people who have taken up this calling in doing anti-racism work has carried and are continuously fine-tuning, because we understand that we are addressing people's lives, right? And the work that we do in every 1 hour or 2 hour presentation or panel conversation has the ability to change lives, right? And livelihoods. And so keeping that in mind with the weight and complexities of the work, where then or how then do you find joy in it? What brings you joy in this work?
This is a very good question, because this is very, very hard work. When I look beyond sort of what I'm hired to do, and I sort of bring sort of what I'm hired to do, and I do organizational change work as well, but which is much larger than a few workshops, but I do take it all very seriously, um, and and joy. I've always found it important to find that joy, and I've mentioned this already. When I see someone engage, and in person, it happens. It's a different way on Zoom, but when someone has kind of, whether it's I've kind of said something in a way, I'm constantly thinking of different ways to say the same thing, different ways to show the same thing. White privilege, just sort of what that looks like, just because privilege freaks people out, so when I've said something, in a way that someone has gone, oh, and sometimes they say it and sometimes they don't. Sometimes I see it in person in their body language. Sometimes they'll say that in sort of evaluations that I hand out afterwards. And it's that makes me very, very happy to see that. And I remember that, but I still constantly think, what are still more other ways that I can, because my brain is never turned off that way. I think the other thing of joy is seeing, just when I move into my communities, and my communities are what I would call, I'm mixed race, sort of Chinese and white. So I'm Jewish on my mother's side. So there are some very progressive Jewish communities. There are very progressive communities of color that I move in that are, they're not even official, but they're just sort of these alliances of folks who are from all sorts of different backgrounds. And whether that's seeing joy in their lives in terms of their children, just what they're doing, how they're contributing to the world. Everyone that I know, and that's my circle, brings their, radical activism to their work, whatever their work is, including parenting, which is absolutely work. I do not have children, and I hugely respect what that means. And to be raising Black and Brown children in this world, right, that hates them, right? So what does this mean then to bring that, to give your children that core? And I see this, in my friends who are raising children, and just my friends, just at all, who just know me, who I can call and say, I'm having a crappy day, can I talk about it? Or I'm having a great day and great things are happening, can I talk about that? And just what that community means. And that is, that's important. And all my friends get, my work. They certainly get how hard it is. This isn't exactly joy, but I can certainly vent to my friends when it's been a challenging, moment, or a challenging client or something like that. And that can definitely be a source, certainly of sustenance and happiness. And just, I'm here, I'm doing it, I'm engaged, I'm learning. That itself is very joyful for me. And it's just important. It's also, a privilege. It's, I'm healthy, I live alone. I'm very, very privileged in terms of COVID, around being able to choose when I engage with the public. I don't, I work, I always worked from home, but I could, go out to a coffee shop. And I used to see clients in person. And while it isn't the same, I now have clients that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Outside of Toronto, outside of Canada, actually, I have a few clients in the United States now. That is specifically because I'm able to do this work, because I now have all the infrastructure of Zoom and things. So, and just anticipating what's going to happen tomorrow makes me happy, because people are contacting me all over the place. Like, I never know what kind of message I'm going to get in my email tomorrow about someone else wanting to engage me in some work. So that's exciting as well.
Oh, that's incredibly exciting. And so as we think about the journey ahead, um, wanting to engage you as we come to a close, if you could share one affirmation or a quote that inspires you, particularly during challenging times, that you'd like to share with our viewers.
Absolutely. This is, I think people will know this, quote. It's fairly well known. It's much longer, but I've chosen the sort of the best part of it. It's Arundhati Roy. Remember, we be many and they be few. They need us more than we need them. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing.
Come on now. Come on now. Okay. Well, thank you. Another world is on its way. Oh,
Yes.
May, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jodie.
for your time. Thank you for sharing that reflection. Thank you for sharing your journey with our organization and with our viewers here today. It's an absolute pleasure connecting with you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
very
very
much.
much. Thank you.